Alrighty, folks, it's just about 2 o'clock. We'll give the folks that sign in a little bit late another minute or three before we get started. But I wanted to start by thanking everybody for showing up. We really appreciate you choosing to spend some time with us today. We're here with John Gilbert from PhaseOne.
Hey guys.
Very, very honored to have him here. If you don't know John, you should. He's the head of US tech support. Extraordinarily knowledgeable. We actually used to be coworkers in a former studio life, so we've both been at this a minute. And generally speaking, we know what we're talking about. John more so than me, but I tease. But yeah, John's amazing at this. He's going to take us through how you use the XF and Capture One together to utilize that amazing focus stack tool that is in the XF camera system. So he's got a combination of some slides that he's going to show, as well as some hands-on with the camera. He's got a real slick setup with multiple camera angles so we can see everything that he's doing, including his subject, the camera, the settings, and all of that. So just another minute or so, and we will get rolling on this. But I want to let a few more folks have some time to get in here and see this. So just bear with us for another minute or two, and we'll actually get rolling. So, all right, yeah. So for the folks that tuned in after I did the intro, let me just do a recap on that quick. I'm Anthony Festa from PhotoCare. I'm here to introduce our bite-sized virtual learning hardware edition with PhaseOne. So PhaseOne has been kind enough to offer to help out run this webinar, and I've got John Gilbert here. He's the head of US Tech Support. He's going to be taking us through how to use the focus stacking tool in the XF camera system in conjunction with Capture One to run a focus stack and why it's important. So I'm here to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to send them through the Q&A portion, not the open chat. The open chat's just if you want to say hi to everybody. But if you have an actual question, please find the Q&A tab, because the reason I like using that is it enables me to mark off that we have completed it. Joining me today besides John is Manny Tejeda. He's also from PhotoCare. He will answer any questions that he needs to. Also gonna, just kind of make sure everything's working nice and easy. Also in the viewer section, we've got both Ziv Argov and Francis Westfield from PhaseOne here as well. So it's nice to have more of the PhaseOne team watching along. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to explain what focus stacking is, how we use the XF to do it, and how we utilize tools in Capture One to make that whole process seamless in order to get it out and get it processed in a tool like Helicon Focus.
Thank you, Anthony. So, like Anthony said, I sort of do tech support for PhaseOne. I've been a part of PhaseOne for going on 13 years now. So it's been a little bit of a minute. And one of the things that I think is interesting about focus stacking is that when I got started in this industry, it was a super niche thing. And now today, it sort of seems like everybody's doing it. And one of the things I want to talk about in this is, why is that? Why has focus stacking sort of taken off? Why did we build it into the XF? What does it really do for you? So bear with me. I'm going to play around with my screens a little bit here, and let's get a little presentation going for us. So I'm just going to share that, and there we go. So here's what we want to talk about a little bit today in focus stacking. Number one, I want to talk about the background. Why do we do it? Because when we kind of understand that, then we can dig in quite a little bit deeper. And Anthony, can you see the presentation okay? After that, we kind of want to talk a little bit about what it is. And then from there, we'll talk about how we actually do it and how we can kind of optimize what we're doing within Capture One. So the first thing that we think about with focus stacking is there's two concepts that are sort of working against each other. And the first concept is this idea of diffraction. And diffraction is this optical phenomenon that happens as we get smaller and smaller apertures. And so what's happening at different aperture sizes in the lens is the light begins to bend around those aperture blades. And as it bends around, the light can either sort of expand or contract, and that affects the maximum resolution that the lens is capable of. So the example I have below, this is an image I've been using for a number of years that I think is just a really sort of simple, straightforward illustration. It was actually shot, this is a 60 megapixel image shot at f8, f22, and f32. And what you start to see here is that we've got all this beautiful detail at f11. Every little bit of the halftone pattern is picked up. If we stop down to f22, which should give us more depth of field, or f32, which should give us even more depth of field, you can see we're actually producing a very soft image. Here, the diffraction is actually stealing away our detail. And one of the things that's interesting about this concept is that as we go up in resolution in our camera, the effect of diffraction appears to be greater. So this 60 megapixel image was a great example. If I shot it on the IQ4 150, that f32 might look even softer. But if we went back 15 years and we were shooting this at 16 megapixels, 22 megapixels in what digital backs used to be, back when DSLRs were like 8 megapixels, 10 megapixels, that f32 image actually looked pretty okay. So a big part of the reason why we start to think about focus stacking today is that we see the effect of diffraction so much more. And the reason for that is that this image at f32 is so much larger than it used to be. So I'm zoomed in there to 100% and we can really see what's going on. If you stand back from your computer screen by about 10 or 15 feet right now, that image probably looks pretty sharp. So just imagine if it was that much smaller, we don't see the effect of that diffraction so much. So more resolution, more diffraction. The other concept that we have to think about is this idea of depth of field. So depth of field also appears to get narrower as we go up in resolution. So the idea behind this chart, just so you kind of know what you're looking at, is the gradient from blue to white is representing sharpness, right? So the blue is super soft, the white is totally sharp, and the image gets sharper as you approach the point that you focused on, right? And that point where everything appears to be in focus is our depth of field. But what depth of field is really, optically speaking, is the point at which we've hit the maximum resolution our system is capable of. So the maximum resolution of the lens, combined with the maximum resolution of our image sensor, our film, whatever we're shooting with. So what happens when we go to a higher resolution is that because we can resolve finer details, we have a larger area that we can see a change in resolution. So my depth of field appears to get narrower as I go up in resolution because I'm seeing details that I never captured before. I'm seeing changes in sharpness that I never saw before. So we're faced with this scenario where, on the one hand, in order to get the most details, we want to shoot around f11 or f8, right? But we want greater depth of field than f11 or f8 can give us. And that resolution, or that depth of field at f11 and f8, is perceptually getting smaller. So what do? We focus stack. And
really quick, I want to interject. When you mention f8 as being the ideal, that's more with a medium format camera system, correct?
Well, it depends. What I found is sort of across the board, somewhere between, let's say, f8 and f14 is generally the sweet spot of a lens.
Okay.
In general. That said, if you have a lens that's super fast, something like a 1.0, 1.2, 1.6, maybe that sort of sweet spot occurs around f5.6. Actually working at super macros, a lot of times that sweet spot ends up occurring closer to 5.6 or maybe even a little bit wider. But in general, by the time we get to f16, we're going to see some effect of diffraction. And again, this isn't a new thing. I can remember, back when we used to work together at the studio,
Yeah.
photographers might, complaining that they had a soft lens,
Right.
with a let's say a 16 megapixel Canon, and it would just turned out they were shooting at too small of an aperture.
Yes. Absolutely.
But so this idea of focus stacking, and I tried to kind of give you a little illustration with these blue lines. So each blue line here represents a plane of focus. So we're going to take a series of images focused on different areas of our object, whatever we're shooting, be it a watch, in this case, a teak Danish monkey, which we're actually going to photograph in a little bit. We're going to take all those files, we're going to work with them in Capture One a little bit, and then we're going to throw them into a stacking software. The demo I'm going to use today is Helicon Focus, but there are a few others out there on the market as well. But that's what we're going to use for an example today. And just, again, to give you an idea of what we're really talking about, the image on the left here is just a single frame, right? It's focused on the front of this, this cake tray. And then the image next to it is the focus stacked version, where we can see the entire figure is in focus, the entire tray is in focus, but we left the background out because you don't need to see the marks on the back of my dining room wall right now. So that's the concept. This is what we're hoping to achieve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out of this presentation, but it's going to get more interesting. Now we will go to our XF and Capture One. And so what I want to kind of show you in here, and I'm going to get up and move around a little bit, is the focus stack tool of the XF. So the focus stack tool of the XF, and actually I'm going to give you a different view. You can kind of see me while I talk. The focus stack tool of the XF is designed to work in a pretty simple way. And before we get into all the details of what it does and how it operates, let's talk about what's on screen here. So the idea is the two sort of important things is this little mountain symbol and this little flower symbol. That just represents the fact that we are going to set a focus point, the farthest point that we want to focus on and the closest point that we want to focus on. So all we're really going to do in this tool is establish our two focus points, save them, and let the camera do the rest of it. So if we kind of walk around this, the first thing is this little question mark. If I just tap that, the lens is going to figure out its exact position. Now, this number that just showed up there, 919, doesn't mean a whole lot. That number just represents the number of little ticks that we turn to the lens to put it into that exact position. So the specific number is not that important. We're just going to use them as a reference. So what we're going to do is I can now use the front dial or the side dial on the camera to actually change the focus of the lens. And so you'll see that number changing there. The lens is actually moving as well. To show you a little bit more about what this looks like, why don't we go to Capture One, and we'll start up live view. And if I sort of start here, we'll zoom in. I'm going to open up my aperture a bit so we can see a little better. And let's bring our focus. That's going the wrong direction. There we go. So those little dancing dots mean we're getting pretty close.
So what John's doing right now is he's utilizing the rear control wheel to change 10 gear units at a time. So if you actually look at that number that's on the LCD, you'll notice that as he pushes that back dial, it moves by 10 gear units. So it's either moving in or out. If he were to use the front dial, it would move 1 gear unit. So it's a much finer movement. So if you're trying to rough it in, it's better to use that rear dial to step on in to make it happen. So
that's kind of where we, again, just to show you that another time. So we've now kind of focused right on that front. We've set our front focus point, and we'll save that as the near point for our focus. Now, let's go and do the back point. And if I look at this, I can't really see anything beyond about that corner. So let's try to move our focus, and you can kind of see it's moving back the monkey. That's my focus peaking from the IQ4. That's what that green light up is. Go right about there. So that's just a little bit past it. And save that as our front point. Now, if you look at the display on the camera, it has 829 as my far focus point, 1079 as my near focus point, and this little blue 93 is the number of frames that the XF thinks I need to get this shot in. Now, the reason it requires so many frames is that I still have my aperture at f5.6. So let's put this back to where I wanted it to be, f11. And you can see that number of frames just cut down to 48 because f11 has greater depth of field than f5.6 does. This auto frame count is available for most of our lenses. If not, I could dial in my own number there and get my own sort of other actions.
Hey,
now,
John, one of the attendees, Adam Savage, has a question. Or more of an observation. He says, I notice that John's not using the focus feature through Capture One. Do you want to maybe speak a little bit towards using the focus control through the software versus using it on the hardware as you did?
It all depends on what you're comfortable with. To be perfectly honest, we can control the focus from Capture One. So a lot of times that just may be simpler or easier for you. I end up doing it a lot just from the body simply because I'm already at the body to save the near or the far distance. But both options absolutely work, and either option can be used.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Hope that helps. What's that?
I said, I hope that helps, Adam.
Yep. The other thing that we can do, and just to kind of give you a little idea here and some little tips and tricks, I have the camera set to use the electronic shutter. I like the electronic shutter for focus stacking as long as I'm not using strobes. If I'm using strobes, I can't use the electronic shutter just because the sync speed is much too slow. If we go to this little icon up in the top here, this little stack of images, this gives me a couple extra options for focus stacking. We can turn the image count, the auto image count on and off. Capture delay allows you to add in a specific delay time between shots. And this is one of those things that's actually particularly useful if you are working with strobes, because you might want enough time for those strobes to recycle. So if you need a delay, we can set a delay there. That way we don't have to do it globally in the XF. The other thing here is we have ES in sequence, and that's talking about utilizing the electronic shutter. And in this case, saying use the electronic shutter specifically when doing focus stacking. That would allow me to use the leaf shutter at other times and then automatically select the electronic shutter in focus stack. So I made an electronic shutter anyway, but you do have that sort of tool specific option. So now that we've actually set our parameters, we set our far distance, we set our close distance, now all that's left to do is actually capture these images. And we can start the sequence capture two ways. We can either press the rear button back here, which is right below this little capture symbol on the screen, so the rear button there. Or I can use the capture button from within Capture One. In general, I tend to do this from Capture One simply because then I'm not touching the camera, I'm not creating any sort of any sort of additional vibration. So it's off and running. It is shooting, images are coming in. And basically the camera's going to shoot about as fast as it can unless you set some sort of delay, be that a vibration delay, be that a delay between shots. So we're getting our 48 images here.
Now, if you needed to, for whatever reason, you know, your product fell over, you realize you didn't have your settings right. If you notice next to the top silver button is a abort on the LCD screen of the camera. If you would press that, it would actually stop the stack where you hit the button from. So you might have 10 frames in, 20 frames in. So if you need to stop, you don't have to let it run the whole way through. Just simply press abort and it'll stop that sequence.
Yep. So, you know, and if we kind of look at these images, here's the last capture. So again, super, super sharp on the front end, but totally out of focus near the back. If I start, you know, sort of moving back in the frame, you can kind of get an idea of, you know, what's in focus, what isn't in focus. And this really gives you kind of an idea of, you know, with a 120 macro lens, and this is a, you know, this guy's maybe about 5 inches tall. You can see that even at f11, my depth of field is really only about an inch or so.
That's definitely helpful to put in perspective for people because they don't, digital, as it's evolved, it's changed ever so slowly. So having that is always a good reminder, I think, showcasing that to people.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and looking at this folder of images, I want to take a couple things into consideration. I currently have 137 files in this folder between a couple different focus stacks that I did while preparing for this. And this last group is 48 images, and I want to do a couple things with them. I want to edit them. I want to add some little, you know, crops and maybe play with the, you know, the look of the file a little bit here. And so we want to think about how do we do that efficiently. And this is where within Capture One, there's a couple concepts that we really want to consider. The first is that you'll notice all of these images have, let's see if we can get that in there. They've got this little symbol in the corner. And hopefully that zoomed for you. But the little symbol that's there is what we call a sequence icon. So because these images were shot in a sequence in Capture One, we get some special tools available to us. So for instance, if I go to the metadata, right down here in the vendor specific area, we have a sequence ID. And then we have some sequence info. So it says we have got a sequence ID, which is basically the serial number of the back plus some other stuff. Frame 26 out of 48 for focus stacking. And it's just a little bit of metadata that the XF writes into the files that tells us these all go together. So when I take a look at this and I say, okay, let's go in and let's do a quick crop on there, you know, something like that. Maybe I want to go in and just sort of pull up a little bit of those shadows, bring in some clarity. I don't know, just making a couple sort of quick edits, right? So
I got, sorry to interrupt. I got a question from Stephen Redfern.
Okay.
He asks if you are using an older PhaseOne lens, like the PhaseOne 120 C-Core AF macro, the XF, he believes the XF will not calculate the number of frames. Is there a mathematical formula that you can use to determine for optimum results?
Well, on the one hand, in theory, there is a mathematical formula because we used some formulas to develop the number ourselves. But I don't know what that formula is. But with a little bit of practice, you'll start to learn about how many frames it typically takes. And actually, so you know, our auto frame count, if anything, errs on the side of taking some extra frames to be safe. we probably could have sufficiently captured this with a few less. So that, you know, there is a fair amount of it's just sort of, you know, experience over time. The nice thing is if we go back to the focus stack tool, so even though I've finished my stack, all those numbers are still there, right? So if I did this and I did 15 frames, and I did a quick test run of them, and I said, you know what, that's not enough images. I've got too many soft points in the final stack. Let me bump that up to 25. I just twist the rear dial, change that to 25, hit capture again, and I get the same sequence, but now with more images in it. So part of having this automated in the camera makes it really easy to sort of experiment, make mistakes, and fix those mistakes. So thinking again, here in Capture One, so I've made a couple little edits to this image. I now want to apply those edits across all the other files that we captured. And that's where this sequence ID is going to come in super handy. Quickest thing I can do here is if I right click, I can say select by same sequence ID. And out of the entire folder, it's only selected the 48 images that were captured together. And so now we do a copy and apply, and I've edited just those images. And so these are sort of done, they're ready. I can process them out and send them to Helicon Focus. But just to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, what else can we do with this sequence ID? Well, again, the sequence ID is just metadata. So where this is actually built in is we can work with it a few different areas. Number one is we can add it as a naming token. So when I'm establishing what should the name of my images be, we could add sequence ID to that. And now as I'm capturing the images could all share that as a name. I can create a smart album in Capture One for a specific sequence ID if I wanted to just view one set of images together. And so the images shot with that sequence ID can automatically populate that smart album. But where I really, really like it is we can use it as a subfolder for processing. So for this specific recipe that I made here, and I'm going to process these out at 25% just to save us time, because we don't want to wait, 5 minutes for me to process these images when we can wait, a minute and a half. But in the File tab for this recipe, so Process Recipe, File, I've set a subfolder to be the sequence ID. And so that's just, we set it like this. We go in here and we look for sequence ID, say okay. And so when I process, I can select all the images in this entire folder, all 137 files, hit process, and they'll be organized in subfolders by their sequence. Now, I've taken the liberty of doing that ahead of time in my prep for this. And so the first two sequences are already here, divided up into their own folders. So now when I select this last group of files, and again, we'll just say select by same, sequence ID, 48 images. So we'll process those. They're all going to go to their own subfolder. And so now that my computer's going, they should run through relatively quickly. So again, you can see here's a new folder, and here's images beginning to appear in that subfolder. I think my graphics cards are a little bit taxed at the moment, running not only Capture One, but Zoom, and I've got another sort of camera program running in the background.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing trying to do processing stuff in a Zoom webinar, and it taxes the machine quite a bit.
Yeah. But so those files are coming down. So we can talk about a couple things here. What I'm going to end up doing is going into, and I'll tell you what, we're going to remove those so we sort of look at what Helicon looks like it's not happy with me either.
So keep in mind that this isn't the performance you would expect on your home machine. Each piece of software we have open right now is pretty taxing on the computer, and combined with all of the other ones needing all this video card ability. So Helicon Focus generally is much more responsive. Capture One is a little bit quicker. So this is just because of the product of what we're doing today.
Yep. Yeah, when I processed these out earlier, it took about 2 minutes to do all 48, just to put it into perspective. That said, let's talk about sort of our options. How do we take these files from Capture One and put them into something like Helicon Focus? There's two ways. There's what I'm doing right now, which is I'm simply processing out the images, and then I'm going to drag and drop them into Helicon Focus. I like that for this scenario where I'm doing a whole bunch of different stacks, because I can do all my shooting. I can do one giant batch process and have them sort of organized on the computer. The other option that I have is I can do it as a round trip from Capture One. And that's with a tool we call Edit With. We have a Edit With Helicon Focus plugin. So you can access that from our website, downloads, installs it as a plugin for Capture One. And what this really does is it's just automating some of these features. When I click on this, what I get is a little drop down, and I set my process settings, and then I would say edit variants. What this tool really affords me is two different options. In the Helicon Focus tab here, it says I can keep process variants or I can get rid of them. So rather than have 48 tips on my computer, we can discard them after the stacking is done automatically. So it cleans that up a little bit. The other thing that it does is when I save the stacked image from Helicon, it's automatically going to bring it back into the same folder that I was working with. So again, it's kind of a nice little round trip thing, but fundamentally, we're still just processing the files, putting them into Helicon, stacking them together.
Hey, John, now where does one find that plugin? It's on the PhaseOne website?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's on the Capture One website.
There we go. Okay.
There we go. I forget sometimes that we have separated the websites.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that everybody out there, all the attendees, were clear on that.
Could get a little confusing if you look at PhaseOne. So,
hey, John,
here's Helicon. Yes.
Before you roll into this part, Dylan actually has a good question related to what you were just talking about. If you were doing batch processing, can you do a batch processing with that with the edit with and select the whole thing, and will it separate them out, or do you have to go one at a time in order to do that with the plugin?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, the plugin is the round trip plugin is really designed to be one at a time, because what it's going to do is it will automatically drop those images into Helicon to be stacked, whereas I'm about to do that manually. So that this next step would have been automated as part of that, and so that we don't have a way to sort of do as a separate thing.
Perfect. So Dylan, one stack at a time, it'll send all 48 pieces or however many pieces, but you can't do multiple different sequences.
Mm-hmm. So I will drag and drop these guys right here as my source images. And we're kind of ready to stack. Now, Helicon has a couple different methods, method A, B, C. They use different math to combine the images together, and they each produce slightly different effects out of that. And they also have different visualizations, which I think is kind of fun. But why don't I'm going to start with C, because I think that the visualization will make the most sense for sort of what's actually happening here. So I'm going to render.
Now, while John's doing that, I just want to make mention that Helicon Focus is not a PhaseOne product. It's not a Capture One product. It's not a PhotoCare product. It is a third-party piece of software that already exists. We don't necessarily sell it, support it. If you buy it still comes with an XF for a 1-year activation, John?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If you purchase an XF camera system, a full camera system, you will get a 1-year license for Helicon Focus. If you haven't purchased it or you bought it, used or something like that, and you wanted to do this type of work, you would need to purchase Helicon Focus. And we can't really speak towards the math and science between methods A, B, and C. They actually have a decent write-up on their website kind of breaking down. You really, with these methods and the controls for those methods, need to really get in and start experimenting with it. I spent a lot of time doing focus stacking. What was it, 2 years ago when this feature really came out, John?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, three, maybe
4 years ago, maybe something like that.
Hard to say.
Yeah, but when it came out, I spent a decent amount of time showcasing it, doing demos, and I found that certain methods worked for certain type of products or certain types of lighting. I've got a notebook, but it's locked in the photo care office right now. So I can't, I'm not 100% sure where I landed with some of them, but when you experiment, you'll start to find how the settings match up to how you've, what your subject matter is and how it's lit, because it's going to build contrast differently per method.
Yeah, and so right now, I did this using method C, and one of the things that I noticed the first time that I ran through this was around some of my edges, I got some halos. And now there's two ways that I can approach this situation. One, if I see this sort of, halo issue or a problem there, Helicon actually has a pretty interesting retouching feature. And basically what it allows you to do is go in and actually just sort of mask in and choose which frame you want. So if I go over here to retouching, I'm just going to kind of figure out which one of these frames is giving me the details that I want. And maybe that one, and now I can just sort of paint that in, and you can see I've gotten rid of that halo there. I'm getting a little nicer edge, a little better detail on that. The other thing that I could do instead of that sort of retouching option is, let's see what this looks like if I did it as a rendering method A, and we'll just re-render it. And this is, again, the reason why I output those files at 25% was because not only did they process faster in Capture One, but you can see how quickly Helicon Focus stacked those together. I mean, that took all of 10 seconds. When I do this at full size, it actually still isn't that long. I still rendered it, in about a minute, but this is nice from a demo purpose, but it's also just nice to do here so you guys can see it a little bit quicker. And so here with rendering method A, I didn't get any of that haloing from the start, right? Now I do see a little area here where there's a little confusion, and that's cutting in, so maybe we'd retouch that little spot of it to get a better result. But that's kind of one of the things you want to do, is you want to look around the image and you want to see if anything was sort of stacked out of place. And if we're happy with it, in this case, yeah, there's a couple things that I could retouch, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. We just click the little save button down here, choose a place to put it, and click save. So popping back over to Capture One, I'll show you the one I did earlier, because I processed that at full size, and you can get a feel for what's really going on in the file. So here's my original stack, and if we kind of take a look at this, it's a pretty insane level of detail. Again, like I said, this guy's maybe 5 inches tall, if that.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's front to back, everything that you set up.
Mm-hmm. And then our background is still, out of focus. And so if we kind of start thinking about some of the things that we might even do, creatively with this. I shot this at f11 to get sort of maximum detail and an okay depth of field for the capture. My background was still fairly out of focus because of where it is, but maybe if I wanted that background even softer, I could do this stack at 5.6 or f4. Now it would take a lot more shots. I might be at, doing 120 captures instead of 48, but I can use the aperture when I'm doing my focus stack as a way to control the depth of field even further. So we can have the object that we want totally in focus, but maybe the foreground out or the background out or other things out.
All right. Well, I answered a couple of questions directly for some folks. Do you have anything else to share with us, John? Do we want to just ask for any general questions if anybody's got?
Yeah, I think if there's other questions that people have, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah. So I mean, if you have any other questions about this, or do we want to go beyond this topic very far, John, or kind of take it as how it comes in?
I mean, I think this is a good sort of start to give people a good kind of understanding of what we're really doing.
Yep.
And like I said, what's nice about the way it's integrated into the XF is that if I did this stack and I look at it and I find out I just got gaps in the middle, I just go over to the XF, change the number of frame count. Or maybe we were, looking back here and saying, if this black edge was soft, aside from this little spot that we could probably fix through some retouching, right? Then I'll just move my far distance farther back, restart the stack, right? All those settings still live on the camera system, and they're there for you, and you can make little tweaks to say, oh, we just needed to go a little bit farther. I can't tell you how many times in demos I sort of thought I had the full depth of field, and then realized after stacking them that I completely missed a corner because I misjudged the angle.
Yeah, I will admit I have absolutely done that more than a handful of times. It's the furthest back point is always further back than you think it is, because it all comes down to camera angle and wherever.
Yeah. Well, especially when if you have the camera at like 45 degrees or something like that on an object, it throws things out in ways that you don't expect.
Well, this is we actually have a good question here from Trisha, John. So she's asking, was capture sharpening applied or disabled before shooting stacking?
In this case, I have very standard sharpening applied to the images. So the sharpening that I've got going on here, we'll just grab one of these files and figure out where it's in focus maybe. I did pretty good there. I have sort of the default value for this camera chosen. And a lot of that is sort of the defaults in Capture One are sort of designed to just make sure that everything looks as sharp as it should be. If we go with something where there's kind of no sharpening applied whatsoever, even things that are in focus can just be a little bit soft, just because that's the nature of a digital file. So I have just a very standard amount of sharpening applied. Now, we could go with less sharpening and then do the sharpening after the fact. That can work as well. But I generally prefer to do my sharpening ahead of time. Now, one of the challenges can be is that if you begin to run into lots of pixel errors because of this, you may want to reduce that sharpening. An analogy or a similar situation would be, instead of focus stacking, maybe we're doing stitching of images. And sometimes we've actually seen with incredibly high res images, if you have sort of no vibration, like we're using the electronic shutter where we just get this like really pristine file, sometimes we almost get too much data, and that sort of contributes to stitching errors. So it might make more sense to do our sharpening afterwards, so we're not sending quite as much data, but it depends on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And it comes down to, again, you're going to have to experiment with what you're getting, run it through Helicon to see how it works out. Because with some of the methods, it's going to add contrast, and that contrast might feel like extra sharpness as well. So I know with some of the jewelry, like really tight macro ring stacks that I had done, I wound up having to disable the sharpening in Capture One with those because of the method in Helicon that was the best for putting together. With Capture One's sharpening on and with the lighting that was on those rings, they just wound up feeling almost too crispy and contrasty. So when I took the sharpening off in Capture One and, you know, reshot the stack and then reprocessed it out, that worked. So it really comes down to finding that balance for your subject matter.
Yeah.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? We're pretty much just about done with the webinar, John. You don't have anything else to showcase with this, right?
No, I think that's most of what I've got
Okay, great.
for us.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if anybody has any other questions they want to type away, that's great. I'm just going to actually, I'm going to share some of the next couple of events that we have coming up with PhotoCare. So I'm going to put those on screen now. So just give me a minute. And here we go. Play from current slides. So some of the next webinars that PhotoCare is working on specifically, part of our bite-sized virtual learning digital darkroom series is returning on Wednesday, the 29th at 2 p.m. I'm going to be taking you through some edits on night photography images, probably 2 images, maybe 3 at the most. It'll be about an hour. We went over by about 15 minutes on one of our other digital darkroom series. So give it about an hour and 20 minutes maybe. So that should be a good fun one to work on. You can sign up through the PhotoCare events page. We will also be hosting with John Gilbert returning on Thursday next week, the PhaseOne XT IQ4 150 hardware demo. So we will be talking about PhaseOne's brand new field camera that was just released last year. John's got it in his hand. It's an amazing little tool. I actually have one here at the house as well that I've been waiting for the right day to go out and shoot with. And then on Friday of next week, John will again be returning to talk about some of the benefits of frame averaging and dual exposure. Frame averaging and dual exposure are tools that are available in the IQ4 150 camera system that utilizes PhaseOne's labs feature and takes some of the math and computing power that's inside that digital back and allows you to do some amazing things to leverage, get better dynamic range, use more creative effects. So you can effectively shoot in broad daylight and act with frame averaging anyhow, capture an image that looks like you had a whole lot of ND on that lens, a whole lot of stops of ND, but maybe you didn't actually have it. If John wants to speak a little bit more towards those features, he can. And we'll have both those next week. You can go to photocare.com, go to our events page and sign up for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say if you come to the XT demo on Thursday, definitely come back on Friday because we're really going to expand a lot deeper into some of those concepts, which we'll show you pretty quickly in the camera system overview, but we'll give you a lot more meat to kind of chew through on the frame averaging dual exposure on Friday.
Yeah, they're going to be great. They're really powerful, interesting tools that can help you make images that you may not have been able to make as easily before. I want to thank John very much from PhaseOne for coming to share this information with us today. I want to thank all of you for attending today. It's weird times out there and we're just trying to get some information out to kind of help you when things start back up again. So, we really appreciate you choosing to spend some time with us today. Stay safe out there, stay strong. John, thank you. I'll see you next week. Really appreciate you coming through. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Enjoy your weekends.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.